Morning, Seth. I'm good. How about you? Sure, sure. It does. Typically, spring and summer are our busiest, I guess you could say, seasons. Every year, we're hopeful that it'll be different, that like this year won't be the year that things increase. While we always want to be available, we're also always optimistic that the trends will down. Unfortunately, this year's no different so far. Our numbers are a little bit staggering at the moment as far as how many people are reaching out for help and needing help. And comparatively to last year, it seems that um, the severity of cases continues to maintain at kind of a higher level as well. Um, I can emphasize that there's quite a bit of physical. A lot of times what we see is more verbal people or one physical situation or one or two physical situations, and then people are turning for help a little bit faster. Unfortunately, some that I've seen here recently, especially, have been kind of long-term physical violence where people are now trying to get help, or that has increased, or has now started to impact their children, or maybe has turned to some of their children, and so they're getting help for that reason. So definitely some more physical things going on. Maybe. Yeah. Yes, yes, yes to all of that. I think the each situation's a little bit different. Uh, Historically speaking, with just like long-term studies of domestic violence, it tends to increase in severity whenever the economy is in a rough spot. Anytime stressors are higher, specifically in the home dynamic, outside the home, financially, we're in a tough spot as a country right now, and I think we're seeing some impacts of that too. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, so I try to do a little bit of research before I'm going to be on here just to see what other agencies are seeing as far as trends, things that we think are kind of important for me to talk about so that people are hearing what's really going on. So as I started that earlier in the week, I got this kind of idea to talk about what are some of the actual impacts on victims, on us who are non-related to it. So I kind of deep dove into some different figures and numbers and stats and things to kind of set a broader picture and give a little bit more baseline information of what really takes place whenever we aren't helping our community help domestic violence. So a really big one that was huge to me, these are new numbers for 2025. So coming from likely 22 to 24, what is that the cost of domestic violence cost the United States about $9.3 billion a year. That's collectively. So that includes payment for law enforcement to respond to calls, emergency room visits, lost work time, um, uh, like legal fees, things like that. It costs, but in general, it would be things that are paid for by tax dollars. So truly, it costs about $9.3 billion a year just in the United States. That's insane. Yeah, absolutely. Yep. Yeah, so I do know that it's about 8 million paid work days a year for our country. 8 million days is what tends to be around the number. I want to say that on average, a victim loses 5 days themselves. I don't have that written down anywhere, but I've read it lots of different places, and I believe that's up from 4 days kind of 20 years ago. It's a history on the trend, or trend on the upward. A lot of times that's because either people have a visible injury that they need to not attend work for, or sometimes partners just won't allow their victims to go to work because it's an escape. It can be for the court system, so that if they are leaving, whatever that is. But I'm pretty sure that it's 5 days a year that victims miss just because of their domestic violence in their home. It does. While in an active domestic violence relationship or because of the aftermath of one, about 30% of victims lose their jobs. 30%. Exactly. Yeah, it's one in three will ever be in one. Over the course of their life, at some point, one in three women will experience significant domestic violence in their relationship. Correct. It's a significant number. And I think there's a little bit of misconception that the people who are losing their jobs or whatever are people with less education and lower paying jobs, and that isn't the case at all. It is truly across the board. There's no demographic that exceeds one over the other. Mhm. Yeah, 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 yep, yeah, yeah. No, you're absolutely correct. There's a couple of facets to dive into that with. One, oftentimes employers or employees or coworkers are the people who first start to notice that something is going on. There's a little bit of hesitation from employers specifically to ask because it kind of flirts with the line of personal and professional, and not knowing what those answers are going to be, uh, unless it's impacting their work. When in reality, victims just need a safe space. Also, especially in the state of Illinois, employees are required to assist in keeping people safe while they're in their workplace. So, if victims are willing to come forward, their employers can actually provide them some level of security, at least while they're at work, so that they do have a safe space. Where a lot of victims, I think, believe they'll be treated differently or that employers aren't going to want to deal with it. And so they're scared to come forward about it because they're afraid it'll have a negative reaction, even in the workplace, when they're already getting a lot of negative reaction in their life, kind of across the board. And that just is one more place. But if people were willing to come forward, I think that there would be a lot more assistance offered to them, partly because it's literally the law. There's a requirement for people to help keep their people safe. Yep. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's a huge education piece that we offer to victims. The same with if you we immediately start talking to people about where they work. Will he or she look for you at work? What can be done at work to help keep you safer? Specifically, if someone is like the front desk receptionist area, if that position needs to be relocated or a door needs to be locked or whatever needs to happen in the time of this kind of crisis and unsafety, those accommodations can absolutely be made and should be made. Also, with that, whenever people need to miss work because of domestic violence, ultimately they're the victim of a crime. While society isn't completely in line with kind of my stance on domestic violence. The end result is it is illegal for one partner to abuse another partner, and ultimately the victim becomes the victim of a crime. So if people are having to miss work for appointments and need to get their life back together, employers are also required by law to provide that time without any fear of retaliation. Yeah, yeah, yes. Yeah, that's huge. So, it can go like it can come together from so many different directions, but a really common trend that we see is that the abusive person will put all finances, purchases in the victim's name. That can include a home, that can be cars, credit cards, whatever can go in their victim's name. And then it becomes the victim's responsibility to manage that debt and keep themselves out of debt. So oftentimes there's financial abuse involved. This is one piece of that. But whenever you don't have control over your own money, yet all of it's in your name, it is such a bargaining tool for manipulation and control, because people by nature don't want to have bad credit. They don't want to miss payments. They don't want to be fearful of going to the court system because of unpaid bills, things like that. But it's a really common practice to keep people in a relationship, so that those bills will continue to be paid. Carries with them forever. Yeah. No, that's correct. Yeah, once you compile it all together and start to see that bigger picture, it is really eye-opening on why it's so difficult to get out of these relationships and rebuild your life, because it's truly from ground zero, or sometimes it's below ground. I mean, you have to truly dig your way out. Right. Of course. Right. Sure. You got it. Yeah, so anybody can find us at willowtreemissions.org. It gives so much information, including contact information. Or you can call us at 217-762-2350. That number can also be sent text messages. As far as who we serve, we're never going to turn anybody away. Our client base, or our network, is truly Piatt County. Anyone within Piatt County, anyone who has fled their situation and is now in Piatt County, or is headed somewhere else and just passing through here. However, I will find you services if I can't do it, no matter where you are. So if you just don't know who else to call, I'll find it for you. Yep, sure. It's 217-762-2350. Yeah. Yeah. So one thing that we know for sure is women age 16 to 24 are just the most likely to be victimized. That's just the reality. That's our highest numbers. What we also know about people who are age 16 to 24 is that they don't have full brain development. They don't have full uh kind of full parameters on right and wrong, things like that. So it plays in a little bit to some statistics. With that, we know for sure that most domestic violence instances are not reported to police. Um, there's a lot of reasons that we know that. A big one is I meet with people every day who are victims of domestic violence who have called the police once, but can tell me 30 instances that have happened. Most people just don't call the police. It's just the reality. But at the same time, most police calls, or the vast majority of police calls, are actually domestic violence calls to law enforcement already, even with only half of them being reported, even with most police calls not being reported, the majority of police calls are still domestic violence. So it's unfathomable if everything was reported. Yeah, data is so crazy with reporting of domestic violence because it's so underreported. However, what we do know, of instances that are reported to police, about 20% of them are partner sexual violence. So not general sexual violence, partner sexual violence. 25% are physical, domestic, physical assault. There was physical contact. And then 50% are stalking. People are more likely to report stalking behaviors or a fear of something that could happen than they are to actually report the physical violence. Oftentimes, they're no longer in the relationship. That's correct. Yep. Oftentimes, yes. The most dangerous time for a victim in their relationship is whenever they decide to leave or ask for help. Yes. A lot of times there's a shift from the abuser once that victim is pregnant with their child, because now the need to increase the control has become even higher for the abuser, be- because now they need to keep them, because they need to have that baby and raise it together. So the increase in violence ultimately is to increase the control, and also people who are pregnant are less likely to leave. So they're more willing to accept further abusive behaviors because they're not willing to leave at this point, because their life is very different than it was prior to pregnancy. Yep, the numbers are staggering on how high a dating relationship shows no warning signs, although there were probably warning signs, but doesn't experience any domestic violence of any kind. And it can change oftentimes the night of a wedding, because now it's more of a property. There's more ownership to the abuser than there was before. Yeah, so domestic violence is absolutely one partner having power and control over the other. So whenever a victim separates or leaves their abuser, that power and control has been taken away. So abusers are more likely to act out in a more severe way to try and regain that power. They'll do anything to regain the power. Unfortunately, in this country, about 1,300 people are killed every year at the hands of their abuser. a domestic violence related experience. Those numbers are unfortunately also very much on the increase. We've seen some pretty locally here lately. Within the last 6 months, there have been Central Illinois domestic violence deaths. Um, at least one of them were people who had been separated for a while. There was an active order of protection in place. No problem.